Good evening. Welcome to class. If you're here with us or stayed warm at home, we're glad you're here. Announcement, drama tonight. If your child or grandchild or prayer pal or good friend is in third grade, Zebras, they have a drama presentation at 7:45. And we'll dismiss before that so you can get to the drama part of the show. So, Zebras, third grade, drama tonight. All right, we are working on what people want to know about the Bible. Comes from a whole lot of questions we've gotten over the years on Know Your Bible. And I kind of arbitrarily group them into 6 kind of main topics that I think people ask about, wonder about. And we've covered the afterlife and Bible basics and end times, and we're working on evil, the problem of evil right now. We're doing all of this because we want to handle the word correctly, and we want to be able to give an answer if somebody asks. The evil concept we introduced last week and got started. A lot of people want to know, why do bad things happen to good people? Did God create evil? Does God use evil? Number one question probably is, why would a loving God allow this? Whatever that this may be for you. We said we would attack it in a couple of parts. First, the intellectual answers, and I'm not sure I like that word, but sounded better than philosophical answers, but kind of head answers, I guess, is what I'm talking about there. The kind of arguments that you would make with an atheist, because this is one of the first attacks or main attacks of atheists against God, is if there is really a all-good God and an all-powerful God, why wouldn't he or couldn't he get rid of evil? And if there is evil, then he's not all good and not all powerful. So we kind of went through some of those intellectual kind of arguments, and then we're going to work tonight more on some practical answers, if you will. The reason for those is the intellectual answers are just fine in a college classroom or an ethics class or something like that, but when something bad happens to you or a close family member or a good friend or just a horrible thing in the world that you see, then it's not quite as easy to just say, well, here's the intellectual answer to that. We need probably a little more practical answer. So that's kind of where we're headed tonight. A very quick review, summarize what we said last week. Some of you are probably thinking, well, why didn't you just say that last week instead of spending 40 minutes arguing around about all sorts of things? In summary, what we said last week was that God created everything good. God didn't create evil. He created everything, and it was very good, and he included free will. Angels and humans had that feature of free will. That was necessary to have a loving relationship with God. So that's why he did it, took that risk. He realized there was a risk, which very quickly manifested itself in Adam and Eve. What God does is not create evil, but he allows a real world with real consequences. His people are in this world to make it better. We're supposed to be salt and light, and any objective reasoning would show that the world is better because of God's people. Would be a lot worse without them. And finally, we mentioned that just because evil's not destroyed right now, doesn't mean it never will be. It will be destroyed someday. and our timing is not quite God's timing sometimes. So that's kind of what we went through last week. Now, when something bad happens to us, when something really horrible in the world happens, a good friend, a family member, whatever, has something that just doesn't seem fair to us, tragic, not reasonable, all that, we may be tempted to ask, why is God doing this to me? And I phrased it that way because that's where some people go first is, all right, why is God doing this to me? He controls everything. Why is he doing this? And there's some justification for that in that God does use evil. We'll talk about that a little more at the end if we've got time. But for instance, the 10 plagues. God used some pretty bad stuff there to judge wicked Pharaoh. And we look at that kind of thing, or we see that there are consequences that God caused in a way, but they're consequences of rebellion, of suffering, the Israelites and the serpents. That God created those serpents. And they attacked the Israelites, and a lot of them died. All that, he was calling them to repentance. Like I said, this is kind of another topic that if we got time, we'll work on. But to ask, why is God doing this to me, is 99.99% of the time the wrong question. God has used evil in certain ways to judge and to punish and all that. But the odds of something bad happening to you being done by God, that approaches zero possibility. That's just not what he does. We ask it that way because we don't think it through, maybe. 99.99% of the time something bad's happening to you because of natural consequences of the earth being fallen, or because you sinned or somebody else's sin results in consequences. It's just the way the world is. The better question, the one that we're going to work on a little bit tonight, is why is God allowing this? I think that's not only a better question, it's a valid question. Why is God allowing this? This doesn't seem fair to me. I don't see why it's happening, and he does allow things, and we're going to look at a number of verses tonight, and I think we'll find some purpose for bad things happening in a lot of cases, and hopefully understand a little bit better, best we can, why God allows things like that. Okay, to do all that, let's start with two gentlemen in the Bible who asked the question, why? Why is this happening to me? Paul didn't phrase it exactly like that, but I think he probably did phrase it that way in his prayers, but Job specifically asked that. Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 talks about his thorn in the flesh. We don't know what it was, most likely a physical ailment of some sort. Some people think it was bad eyes and near blindness. There are some people that think it was not a physical disability. It was, he calls it a messenger from Satan. Some people think that means it was a person, some body that gave Paul a lot of trouble. followed him around and caused trouble for him, but we don't know. But he calls it a thorn in the flesh, and he says he was given this thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan, to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. So he gives a little glimpse of some purposes there. We're not quite ready to talk about that, but Paul gives us a couple of reasons that he had this thorn in the flesh, which he didn't understand why. But if you go back and read through that and wherever else Paul mentioned it, what answer did God give him about why? You can't find one. God doesn't answer him. He doesn't tell him, here's why I let this happen to you. Here's why I have allowed this. Now, Paul thought it was to keep him from being conceited because of his other visions and all that, but God doesn't answer. He just says, my grace is sufficient. It'll be all right. So, Paul doesn't get an answer to that. Job is even a more stark example of God's answer. I think everybody in this class anyway is probably very familiar with the story of Job. He and his 3 friends tried to figure out why all this bad stuff was happening to him. And the 3 friends had all kinds of answers. Basically all said, well, they had to have done something wrong. And Job repeatedly claims he's innocent. I didn't do anything to deserve this. Why is God allowing this? He can see no reason why this is happening to him. And he he challenges God. Tell me why. I don't understand this. I hadn't done anything to deserve it. And the first 37 chapters of the book of Job are Job and his friends trying to figure this all out. Basically talking about what we're talking about. Why is this bad stuff happening to a really good person? So the first 37 chapters are that way, and God's silent in all of that. And then in chapter 38, and for the next few chapters, God responds, which is the clearest explanation of the problem we're talking about here that is in the Bible, really. And what the Lord says, chapter 38 and verse 1, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me. Okay. And that begins a monologue by God where God questions Job, and he starts out and says, okay, who's questioning me? You're asking me why I have allowed this. You're questioning me without knowledge. In other words, you wouldn't understand if I told you. That's something we say to children sometimes. We may not say it, but we just may not give them an answer because they don't understand. They wouldn't understand. And that's what God says to Job is, who's asking me why I allow this? He said, get dressed, act like a man, I'll ask you some questions. And he starts in on his questions, and he asks Job over and over for the next 3-4 chapters, do you not understand this? Do you understand how I made this? Do you understand how the seasons work? Do you understand how animals work? Do you understand how any of this works? If you don't understand any of that, why are you asking me why I allow this? Okay, so we read on, and we keep thinking, okay, come on, God, give him the answer. This is all real interesting, but tell him why. Do you ever find it? Not in there. The only answer God gives to this question of why do you allow bad things to happen to me or to us is you don't understand. You don't understand any of the basics about me. Okay? Never even proposes an answer. Just asks him all these questions and stops. Okay? So when we ask, why is God allowing this to happen to us, we're not the first people to ask that. And the examples we get of people asking that, they don't get an answer. So it's a little presumptuous to think that in the next 20 minutes we're going to find the answer. God didn't give an answer to that. Now, we've got some clues. There are quite a few verses, and we'll look at most of them. We couldn't cover all of them, but we'll look at most of them that give us kind of an idea of, okay, I could maybe see some purpose to this. Okay, first thing I want to say about before we start looking at the practical answers is there's a difference between us knowing what the purpose is and God having a purpose for it. Okay? God didn't tell Job what the purpose was. He just said he wouldn't understand it if he told him, basically. Romans 8:28, based on faith, Paul said, we know God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. We know it's going to work for good, but we don't understand how. Okay? That's not an answer to why things happen, but it's kind of an answer to why we can't figure it out sometimes. Sometimes after the fact we kind of figure it out a little bit, but in the middle of it we usually don't. Once again, that's a little comparable to a parent and child. A child may think something that he's in the middle of is the absolute worst thing that ever happened in his life. And if he's young enough, he's bawling his eyes out that mommy or daddy would allow this to happen. Okay, well, you know the purpose for it. You know why he's got to go through this. Okay, the old example, it doesn't work anymore, but the old example is a kid learning to ride a bike. You put him on it and send him off down the driveway, and he's going to skin a knee or two. Well, that's what you have to do to ride a bike. Okay, I said that doesn't work anymore because now we buy $400 worth of protective equipment and wrap them in bubble wrap and then teach them to ride a bike. But there's probably something you can find similar to that today. Parents have a purpose. The kid doesn't know it. Doesn't mean there isn't a purpose. Okay, so starting with that, now let's look at a few purposes or practical answers to why bad things happen. Number one, or first one I put down anyway, is some evil warns us of greater evils. Okay? There are some things that happen in life that warn us. When you touch a hot stove, you don't touch it very long. Okay? You figure that out real quick, that no, that's not a good idea. Okay? People that don't suffer that like lepers who have no pain sensors in their hands, would lay their hand on a hot stove like that, and the first thing they might know is a smell that they don't recognize. They don't get that warning of something that's going to be worse. Okay, well, some evil's like that. Some things happen, and that keeps us from getting into more evil. Okay, second one, some evil brings about a greater good. Joseph's classic example of this, Genesis 50:20, when he was dealing with his brothers after all of the finagling and them coming to Egypt and all of that, they were afraid that he was going to punish them. I mean, all they had done is sold him into slavery and thrown him down a well and a few things like that. So for some reason, they were worried about this. Okay, and Joseph's answer is instructive. Joseph said, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." Okay, now when David was in that well, or when he was in prison, do you think he had that all figured out? Okay. Maybe God told him, but I doubt it. He didn't know why he was in these situations. He just trusted God. But when the brothers brought it up toward the end of the book, he says, "Yeah, I know you meant evil to me. You meant to throw me down the well. You meant to sell me so you'd never have to see me again. You meant all that for evil. But God, in his purpose, had this bigger plan, that he was going to save the Israelites." Okay. Now, when we're in the middle of the well or the prison or whatever mess we're in, it's really hard to think about that. But that's one reason for evil, one purpose of evil, one explanation for why God allows stuff, is there may be a greater good and a purpose that we don't understand right now. All right, next one I put down is some evil helps defeat evil. Okay. Some of you may have seen the TV shows or movies or whatever they used to be about Scared Straight, where guys in prison get a bunch of young gang members or young juvenile delinquents and tell them what prison's like and what their life is like. Okay, and their purpose is to scare them straight. Okay, I'm not sure it always works, but their evil, the bad things that they've done and the consequences that they've suffered in prison can help prevent more evil, can help defeat evil, if you will. If they can scare one kid straight and keep him from going into that kind of a life, there's kind of a purpose there in their life. Okay? Would it be better if none of that existed? Yeah, but that's not the world we live in. So sometimes evil helps defeat evil. You may have known people like I have who would never touch a drop of alcohol. Okay? And if you ask them why, or if they're willing to tell you why, it's because they grew up with an alcoholic parent or somebody very close that they saw what this did. Okay? And they resolved, I'm not going to do that. In fact, I just remembered, I didn't have it in my notes, but Donald Trump doesn't drink, okay, because of what he saw happen to his brother. Okay? So sometimes something bad helps defeat more evil. Of course, classic example is Was what happened on Calvary an evil thing? Was what happened to Jesus really a bad thing happening to a good person? Actually, the worst thing happening to the best person. Okay. What was the purpose of that? Well, Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 said, death doesn't have any sting anymore. There's the purpose. A really bad thing happening to a really good person defeated the sting of death. All right, another one. Some evil draws us closer to God. This is something we usually don't see till afterwards, but we might recognize it afterwards. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 1, 8 and 9, talking about his problems on his missionary journeys, on his trips. He said, we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death. But that made us rely not on ourselves, but on God. Okay? So what Paul says in that profound little couple of verses is God allowed so many bad things to happen to us, we thought we were dying. We'd given up. We despaired of life itself. That's how bad it was. Okay? But the reason for that, what came out of that was, we figured it was beyond us. We couldn't rely on ourselves. We were so utterly burdened beyond our strength. Okay? People get to that point in life. And when you get there, okay, I cannot handle this. Okay? If you don't have a faith in somebody else that can handle it, I don't know what you do. Well, I know what the world does a lot of the times. But Paul got to that point where I can't handle this. Things are so bad on this missionary business that I might as well die. But I can't handle it, but I know who can. Okay? So allowing evil may not make sense to us, but at least sometimes it draws us closer to God. All right, another one. Some evil shows God to others. Okay? Paul's writing about this in 2 Corinthians 4, and he talks about how our outward man is failing, how we have physical problems, and it gets worse the older you get, they tell me. He says, we have this treasure. We've got this gift of God, grace from God. We have this treasure in jars of clay. Our bodily temple is breaking down all the time. It's got problems. We have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. Okay? What Paul's saying there is there ought to be a difference between us and the world. We all got problems. We all got troubles. Okay? But the grace of God is in our jar of clay so that people can see we handle things differently than somebody without any hope. Okay? There should be that difference. The world should look at us and wonder, how does he handle all of that? How does she deal with all the bad things that have happened to her? All of you know somebody like that. Within the kingdom, we know people like that stand out among people who ought to all be like that, but there's some that we recognize. Man, I don't know if I could handle that. Okay, well, think about the difference within the kingdom and how much different that ought to be from the world. And that's what Paul says, is people ought to look at us, and when they see everything, he uses himself as an example, we've gone through all these problems that he was just talking about in the last slide, and we're not destroyed. We're not defeated. We're not crushed. We get by because we've got somebody that handles it for us, with us. Okay, so people ought to recognize that. So that is a purpose that others ought to see God in us sometimes because of the bad things happening to us. All right, another one, last one actually. This world is not our home. Jesus said, the last verse there on the slide, John 16:33, Jesus said, here on earth you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart because I've overcome the world. Okay. He sees this life as just a temporary, short thing. Okay. We don't see it that way. We see this life as it. We shouldn't, but we do sometimes. And so when you think this life is just it, then the sufferings and bad things and tragedies and all that seem a lot worse. Okay. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 4:17 about the verse we just looked at, about all the problems that he had and the treasures in jars of clay and all that. Here's what he calls it. He says, this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. Light momentary affliction. Okay? And that's really hard to see sometimes. If you've been to paradise, like Paul had, maybe you can see that a little easier. Maybe after you've had that vision or that trip, whether it was a physical trip or not, even he didn't know, but he had seen paradise, and what he concluded was, stuff down here is a light momentary affliction. Okay? Romans 8:18, he says the same thing again. He says, I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. Okay. The sufferings of this present time. Wouldn't it be fun to interview Paul? Paul, this thing you wrote here about light momentary afflictions and sufferings of this present time, not worth worrying about. What are you talking about? What did you have go wrong in your life? You were a big-time apostle. Okay, well, Paul made us a list. And if you interviewed him and asked him that, he'd say, 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. I got flogged 39 times. 5 times I did that. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day adrift in the sea. On frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my own people, dangers from Gentiles, danger in the city, dangers in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food in cold and exposure. Well, what did you think about that, Paul? Light and momentary. Not worth comparing to what I saw up there. Okay? That's a whole different perspective. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that makes it real easy when you're in the middle of the storm to say, oh, okay. But that's one of the answers. Okay? And all those put together, if you're in the mess that some of us get into in this world, all that put together may not help, may not make any sense when you're in the middle of it. But you go back to Job, and he had an unbelievable amount of bad things happen. And you go back to him, and there was no rational reason for it. And there was no theological reason for it. God wouldn't tell him. And what was Job's answer? I'll still trust God. Yeah. And like I said, all of these, and you notice I put answers in quote marks because when you're in the middle of it, they're not really answers. But the ultimate answer is to trust God, is what Job ended up with. Okay, we got a minute. I wanted to add one little different take on some of the stuff we've been talking about. The question of whether God uses evil is kind of interesting. I told you he obviously used the plagues to straighten Pharaoh out and to display his glory and all of that. But does God use evil to bring about his permissive will? And the book of Habakkuk is a very interesting little book. You can read it in a couple of minutes. It's over near the end of the Testament somewhere. Habakkuk, there it is. Just a couple of pages. Okay, so the story of Habakkuk is a great sermon outline, by the way. Okay, so it starts out, and God tells Habakkuk in verse 5 and on that Judah's been so wicked that he's going to punish them. And he says how he's going to do it is he says, I'm raising up Babylon. Verse 5, look among the nations and see, wonder and be astounded. For I am doing a work in your day that you would not believe if I told you. For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, or the Babylonians, that bitter and hasty nation. Ruthless and dreaded is another translation. These are bad guys. And he goes on and describes how bad they are. And he says, I'm raising up Babylon to punish Judah. Okay? So does God use evil? Yeah. Sometimes for his purposes. And Habakkuk responds in chapter 2 mostly, but he responds and asks God, how can you use a nation that's more wicked than Judah to punish Judah? It doesn't make sense to me. How can you do that? And God assures him in chapter 3, toward the end, he says, oh, Babylon's going to get punished too. Now, I'm going to punish them later. Okay? And the key to all of that, to the whole book of Habakkuk, no matter what problem you're in or trying to wrestle with, is go to chapter 3, verse 16. And here's what Habakkuk concluded after all this. Habakkuk said, I hear, and my body trembles. My lips quiver at the sound. Rottenness enters into my bones. My legs tremble beneath me. Yet I will quietly wait for the day of trouble to come upon people who invade us. Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. Okay. That's what Habakkuk ended up with. God told him, I'm raising up Babylon to take Judah out. And Habakkuk says, how can you do that? And God says, well, I'm going to do that. I'll punish Babylon too. And Habakkuk's only conclusion is, all right, it's going to happen. And I'll wait and see it. And no matter how bad it gets, I'm going to trust God. Okay? So all of the intellectual or practical answers and all that may be helpful in arguments or reasoning at certain times, but certain times they're not going to do. Certain times the only answer is, I'll trust God. All right, next week, what are we doing? Let's talk about salvation. Get a lot of Know Your Bible questions about salvation, baptism. Get a lot of questions about baptism, who's a candidate, what's the mode, what's the method, all of that. Once saved, always saved. All sorts of things we can talk about in the salvation questions. So we will start that next week, good Lord willing. All right, drama presentation, 7:45, 2 minutes to get there. Zebras, third grade. You're dismissed.